Hey, here we are, chapter 15. The wind had died away some time before dawn, as if, having done its appointed job of clearing the clouds from the sky, it knew it was time to move on. The following day dawned cold and bright, and when Will stirred from the small room the innkeeper had assigned to him, the morning sun glared brightly off the surrounding snowscape and streamed through the windows of the tap room. Will greeted the tavern keeper with a mug of coffee. The kitchen maid had served him breakfast of toasted bread and slices of cold ham, but, as ever, it was the coffee he craved. Apparently the tavern keeper was a kindred spirit. He poured himself a mug and sat opposite Will, taking a sip and sighing appreciatively. "A good night last night," he said, an unspoken question behind the words. Will nodded. "For both of us, I think," he replied. There was an expectant silence as the tavern keeper waited to see if Will would say anything more. Finally, deciding that the juggler was leaving the running to him, he held out his hand across the table. Cullum, Gelderers is the name, by the way. We never got round to introductions last night." Will shook their hand. Will Barton," he said. The tavern keeper nodded several times, as if the name meant something to him. "Yes, a good night it was," he repeated. Will sipped his coffee, saying nothing. Finally, Gelderus broached the subject that was on his mind. "Be an even better one tonight. End of the week, we usually get a good crowd. Be even bigger than usual if word gets around there's a juggler in the village." He looked at Will across the top of his coffee mug. "Planning to stay another night, were you?" Will was expecting this question. Even though he was eager to get on and reach Castle Mackendale, he knew that he had better stay another night at least. The pickings were good in the village, as he'd seen last night. If Galderus was correct, and there was no reason to assume he wasn't, they'd be better tonight. It mightn't seem suspicious if he passed up the chance to make good money, he realized. Still, a certain amount of bargaining was expected. "I hadn't really decided," he said. "I suppose I could move on." "Where to?" Garside asked quickly. Will shrugged as if the matter was of no greater importance. "Eventually to Castle Mackendale. I've heard Lord Siren gives a warm welcome to entertainers. I suppose there's precious little to keep people occupied once the snow comes," he added. But Gelderus was shaking his head. "You'll get no welcome from Siren," he said. "He hasn't spoken a word these past 2 months or more." Will frowned slightly, as if not understanding. What, become a monk, he said. "Suddenly got religious and taken a vow of silence." He grinned to make sure Garrick knew he was joking, but there was no answering smile from the tavern keeper. "There's little of religion about it," he said quite darkly. "Just the opposite, in fact." "Not the black art?" Will asked casually, using the country people's term for sorcery. This time, I'm just going to say Mr. G because I don't know how to pronounce his name. Glanced quickly around before answering. "So they say," he said, his voice lowered. "Struck down he was, healthy as you or me 1 minute. The next, he's lying close to death, barely breathing, eyes wide open but seeing nothing, hearing nothing, and saying nothing." The healers, what do they do? What do they say?" Will asked. Mr. G snorted in scorn. "What do they even know? They can't explain his condition, nor can they do anything to ease it. Occasionally he rouses himself enough to take a little food, but he's barely conscious even then, and then he's gone again, back into his trance." Will set his empty coffee mug down, thought about another cup, then reluctantly dismissed the idea. Since he'd been living by himself, he had become a coffee hound, and it was time to moderate his behaviour. "Is this anything to do with this business last night?" he asked. "That mysterious warrior person and such?" Again Mr. G hesitated before answering, but it seemed easier to discuss these matters in the brighter light of morning. If you ask me," he said. "If you ask me, yes," he said. "People say that Melkman has returned to Grimsdale Wood." "Melkman," Will repeated. "A black artist, a sorcerer, one of the world's worst kind apparently. He had a feud with Siren's ancestor going back 200 or 300 years." "300 years," Will repeated, edging his voice with disbelief. "How long does a sorcerer live, anyway?" Mr. G raised an admonishing finger. "Don't be too quick to disbelieve," he said. "Nobody knows how long sorcerers can live. I'd say it's pretty much up to the sorcerer himself. But these goings-on in Grimsdale don't have any other explanation, nor does Lord Siren's strange sickness. Stories go that it was exactly the same sickness struck down his ancestor when he fought with Melkomen. So if this Melkomen is in Grimsdale Wood, why doesn't someone from Mackendale take a few soldiers in and give him a seeing to? Will ask. Somebody must have taken charge if Siren's incapable. You don't just march into Grimsdale Wood, Will Barton. It's a tangle of trees and undergrowth in there, with paths that twist and turn on themselves, and branches above you so thick you only see the sun at noon. There's the mere. There's the mere as well. Step in that and you'll sink to the bottom and never see again. Will considered that fact for a few moments. The tavern keeper was turning out to be a mine of information. So there's nobody in charge at Mackendale, he said. And added, that's a blow. I was hoping to winter there at least a few weeks. Mr. G pursed his lips. Oh, you'll most likely find a position there. Siren's son has taken over the runnings of things. Strange cove he is, too, he added darkly. Will looked up quickly. Strange, you say? He prompted, and Mr. G nodded emphatically. There are those who say he might even be behind his father's illness. He's very withdrawn, very mysterious, wears a black robe like a monk, although he's no man of the church. A scholar he calls himself, but what does he study? I want to know. You think he might be this? Will hesitated, seeming to search for the name, although he knew it well enough. Melkomen, he concluded. Mr. G looked a little uncomfortable now that he had been asked point blank to make a statement. A statement one way or the other. He shifted in his seat. I'm not saying that it's so, he said finally, but I'm saying I wouldn't be too surprised if it were. Word has it that Ormond spends all his time in his tower room studying books and old scrolls that he's got his hands on. He may be Lord of Mackendale, but he's no leader of men, no warrior. Thankfully, Sir Kieran is there to look after that side of things. Will raised an eyebrow at the new name. Mr. G needed no further prompting. Siren's nephew, Ormond's cousin. He's a fine warrior, some years younger than Ormond, but a natural leader and popular with the men at arms. I often thought that perhaps Lord Siren would have preferred it if Kieran was his son rather than Ormond. This close to the Pictor border, you'd have need of a good warrior in the castle, Will mused, and the tavern keeper nodded his assent. That's a fact. There's more than one of us. There's more than one of us is glad Kieran is there. If the Scotty ever get wind that a weak leader like Ormond was in charge, we'd all be wearing kilts and eating haggis before the month was out. Will rose and stretched. Ah, well, it's all politics, and that's beyond a simple man like myself. As long as I can get a bed and lodging at Ormond's castle and make a little money to see me on my way, I'll be content. But tonight, of course, I'll spend in your castle. Cullum seemed content with the news. He gestured to the coffee pot warming by the fire. Fine by me. Want some more coffee while it's still fresh? Good intentions flew out the window. Will reflected that gathering intelligence was thirsty work. He picked up his mug. Why not, he said. Alright, I'd like to thank you for listening to read up to chapter 15. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 16, then please stay posted and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye bye.